Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Ask an Addiction Specialist. We've got myself, Bob Weathers,
Odie
Martinez, Austin Armstrong. We're all in the studio here. We have a special Thanksgiving session today. Our podcast is going to be about gratitude. And I want to tell you something you guys can be grateful for in the audience is that hopefully you're not getting in the car and driving out of the LA Basin to Arizona like Odie, or flying out of Los Angeles International Airport to Florida like Austin. I hope that you're home safe this weekend. We all have things to be thankful for, and I want to thank Austin for being long-suffering through many sessions, and Odie for you joining me for the last half a year. I really appreciate both of you a lot. It's really a pleasure to come here every Wednesday afternoon and have you all join us. I want to thank all of you who join us regularly. I want to thank Angela, who's been a faithful member throughout, and any of the rest of you who have joined us and are on the quieter side. Want to thank you for supporting us. We have every week between 100 and 200 people that sit in and watch us, and then other people review these videos through the archived banks that we have in various locations. I'll mention more about that. But I want to thank all of you for supporting what we're trying to do here, which is to get out good, positive education to address addiction recovery. So thank you for joining us this last year, and happy Thanksgiving to all of you. By way of background, my training is in psychology. I currently teach at a local university. In fact, right up to the time that we met today, I'm reviewing doctoral dissertations, most of which center around addiction and recovery. And so I'm really grateful for that work. And it lends a tone then to the conversations that Odie and I have with you, because there's so many different approaches to addiction and recovery. Many of those that are better known include the 12-step approaches that really focus on spirituality and fellowship. And I fully support a spiritual approach to addiction in complementarity with a biological approach, which is not my expertise particularly. Just worked this morning with a local physician who I work hand in hand with him, where he works on the biomedical and the nutritional, and I really focus on the psychological and the social. And so that will be the focus today, as it has been in our podcast, but it's not meant to be exclusive. It's actually meant to be inclusive. If you think about it, Odie is body, mind, and spirit, so is Bob. And if we want to get more interesting, we can add soul to that and have ways of talking about that. I did this morning with a client, as well as shadow, talking about some of the shadow things that can inform our addictions. And so all of that is fair game, and really value all of that. But I will readily acknowledge that my expertise, my background, is primarily in psychology. Most of my work is as a recovery coach. In fact, all of my work is as a recovery coach, because even the academic work I am involved in, where I'm chairing doctoral dissertations, really focuses on recovery. I work with groups locally, including at Beginnings Treatment Center, which I just came from. I was just telling Odie and Austin, I'm so gratified to facilitate the groups that I lead each week. I lead between 8 and 10 groups a week with primarily young adults, most of them young men. Sometimes it's mixed groups, and occasionally it's an all-female group. Most of the work I do is with young men in their 20s and 30s who are all in recovery from everything from alcohol addiction to cocaine to heroin, other opiates, and methamphetamine. And so a whole range of addictions. And I feel really called to do this work. I feel really grateful. Really just came from a really meaningful group today, and I know it will inform the conversation that Odie and I have. Want to thank Beginnings Treatment Centers. Excuse me. They're the sponsors for our weekly podcast, along with Therapy Cable. And I want to thank them, and also recommend that you go to the website, Beginnings Treatment Centers, if you want to access an archive of all of our previous video podcasts. You can also find them under Ask an Addiction Specialist. If you search through YouTube, you can find them there. You can also find them archived on our Facebook group, Ask an Addiction Specialist. So thank you for joining us, and we dive in. Last week we talked about the way out of shame, and I had intended to pick a different topic, which we bumped to next week because I just felt like it made sense for us to spend today. This is the day before Thanksgiving. Spend a session on looking at Thanksgiving and or gratitude and how that relates to so much of what we talk about here in terms of healing and recovering from addiction. So today our topic is celebrating Thanksgiving. Quite literally, there's kind of a double entendre there. We're celebrating Thanksgiving tomorrow in Arizona and Florida and California. And we're also celebrating the giving of thanks. And so that's really our topic for today is the giving of thanks. I want to recommend, if you haven't joined us before, that you feel free to contribute questions or comments. Austin is our man of many talents, including moderating the discussion, and he'll forward questions or comments that you have for Odie and me. He'll forward those to us in real time, and we'll do the best to weave them in. Really value the dialogue, so please feel completely invited. You can do that through Ask an Addiction Specialist Facebook group. It's open right now for chat, as well as through YouTube. So in those cases, feel free to communicate to Austin, and he'll send a carrier pigeon carrying your message to us. Okay. So let's dive in, and I want to set a tone here today, and I'm very aware this week is that I want to weave in some psychological concepts that are significant in terms of my own history and psychology, and it'll be fun to draw you in. And so hopefully you'll leave today with a few different vocabulary words from psychology that you may or not be familiar with, and that they'll be centered or rooted in this idea of gratitude. So the first thing I want to suggest, and it's certainly rooted in our previous conversations, is that shame, which is another way to look at it in terms of low self-esteem, where I feel bad about myself as a person, not so much about only what I've done, but who I am as a person, that it tends to smother out feelings of gratitude. In fact, if you want to flip it around the opposite way, that to be grateful, it may be one of the more significant things we can do to overcome shame. And so to make sense of that, I've got several different angles that I want to take on that particular thesis today. So if gratitude has the possibility of healing shame, how does that work? Back in graduate school, which is now 35 years ago or more, I did a research project on what was called the just world hypothesis. And in a nutshell, what this is that all of us vary in terms of our belief in the idea of a just world. Simply put, that means good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people. And to the extent that you believe that firmly or even rigidly, you'd be on one extreme of belief in a just world. And there's actually a paper and pencil test that can be given to test this. And to the extent you don't believe that, you'd be on the opposite extreme. And so we all vary in terms of that. But the fact is, all of us carry some, on a continuum, all of us carry some sense of that if I'm a good person and do good things, hopefully good things will come to me. It can be the basis for looking at many of our moral behaviors and so on. Well, one of the ways that this can turn back on us, and this gets specific in our conversations previously about shame, is that if Odie feels good about himself and Bob feels bad about himself, is that for Odie there won't be any particular dissonance in being grateful, because after all, he has a lot to be grateful for because he's a good person. And we've just established from a belief in a just world, good things happen to good people. But imagine if Bob is as a low self-esteem or feels bad about himself, and Odie comes along and says, "Hey, Bob, tomorrow's Thanksgiving. Why don't you be thankful?" Can you get where the rub would be with that? Is that if I'm a bad person, that is, if I'm operating from a shamed self-concept, the idea of being grateful. Wait, how can I be grateful, Odie? Because I'm a bad person, and how can good things happen to bad people? The fact is that raises a dissonance. And it can be quite difficult to express gratitude, because to express gratitude would be to be thankful for good things that have happened. And how can good things happen if you're a bad person? Does that make any sense, Odie?
Yes, perfect sense.
Okay, all right. So far, so good.
So far, so good.
Okay, that's our first little column here to kind of support where we're going with that.
Okay.
So to take it to the next step, the idea, if we stick with the example, if I live in a place of not feeling accepted in the world and not being competent in the world, really not not contributing to the world, maybe even feeling defective about myself, that the idea, if I have a shamed self-concept, the idea of success it seems inaccessible. It's beyond my reach. And so shame has the capacity to not only erase my hope for success, but it does the oddest thing, is to the extent that I operate with a shamed self-concept, or to put it in another language, to the extent I operate with impoverished self-esteem, that even when I literally have success, I won't see it. Does that make sense? It'll make us oblivious to it or blind.
Yeah, I can relate to what you're saying. I still have those tendencies even today, where if something goes just the way that I planned it,
right,
it feels weird.
Yes, that's exactly it. That's exactly.
So where's the? I feel like it's a double door. So one opens like, okay, where's the closed door in this? You know what I mean?
Yeah, this isn't uncommon.
Yeah.
You won't be alone with that. And all of us carry some of what Odie's talking about inside. So, for example, if you've had successes, let's say that somebody praises you, there can be this lingering feeling of, when's the other shoe going to drop? The sense of, well, I might have lucked out, but bad things are going to happen to me because after all, I have low self-esteem. So there's this kind of lingering sense of ill ease, and you really named it well, that can go with even successes. It's like, well, that was an accident.
Yeah.
You know, and so if you reflect on this for yourself, if you experience feeling off balance when somebody compliments you, it might be an indirect indicator of operating with shame. The crazy thing about shame is that most of us don't walk around going, oh, I feel ashamed of myself. That isn't the way that it goes. It comes up in these indirect ways where you go, wow, there's some part of me that doesn't think I even deserve success. It comes up even that when I do succeed at something temporarily, I'm waiting for the world to cave in the next minute. Or the idea of, how does it go? I don't want to get too much hope going here because it could jinx my success. That I have jinxing something.
I don't want to get my hopes up.
Yeah, I don't want to get my hopes up because after all, the fall would be great. All of those things relate to what we're talking about. So shame has this kind of opposite energy to success. Okay, so next step. For years, I taught at a local graduate school, and one of the fellow faculty was the father of what's referred to as behavior therapy, Dr. Joseph Wolpe, who hailed from South Africa. He was a psychiatrist by background and had his career in the United States at Temple University in Philadelphia, and then eventually came out to California. I worked with him, and he was one of the concepts that was central to his theory of behavior therapy. He focused on changing behavior. He didn't focus on changing your thoughts or changing your emotions. He focused on behavior. My own sense of it is all three of those lead to change, and you can just kind of pick your entry point. He really focused on behavior. He introduced this concept of reciprocal inhibition. That's a mouthful. I highly recommend that you memorize this term and bring it to the Thanksgiving table tomorrow. Austin and Odie, I'm going to check in with you next week. How did it go with reciprocal inhibition? Okay. The idea of reciprocal inhibition is that if you pick two incompatible behaviors, to practice one of them will virtually reduce the appearance of the other one. And so how that applies to what we're talking about is that, what about if we go back to the earlier example? If Bob doesn't feel very good about himself, what would it be like to practice the opposite of not feeling good about yourself? What would it be like to practice thoughts and behaviors that support success? And it sounds kind of hokey, except it can be very effective. I'll give you a very practical example. It's impossible, Odie, for you and I to be relaxed or calm on the one hand and stressed out of our gourds on the other. It's quite impossible to have those. Okay. And so Dr. Wolpe was one of these who developed, he called it systematic desensitization. I think he liked big words. And so he picked this idea that you can desensitize, you can relax your body systematically to where things that were very stressful, for example, something that you have a great fear of, if you can learn how to practice being calm in the presence of that, over time, you can actually get over a phobia.
Okay.
So the example I've given in the past is that if we're in a building right now, here in, are we in Irvine or Costa Mesa?
Irvine.
In Irvine, and we're on the 6th floor, right? And I don't know about you guys, but I take the elevator. I don't take the stairs. You take the elevator?
Yeah, I take the elevator.
Imagine if you've had a really bad experience or set of experiences around elevators. It might be that you take the stairs, and that would be challenging, but plenty of people do that. And elevator phobia is not that unusual. And Dr. Wolpe would work on this by saying, let's teach Odie and Bob to relax, just in a room away from the elevator, teach them how to calm themselves, and then let's gradually introduce them to the elevator. So maybe I want you guys to relax and I want you to think of the elevator. And you have us relax again. And it gets to where you practice just thinking about the elevator. And you actually gradually approach, it's called exposure, you gradually approach the elevator. And over time, given patience, systematic desensitization, you'll get desensitized to the fear that you once had. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so you can take almost any phobia and utilizing this technique, teach people to be calm in the presence of something that before that only stressed them out. Yes, sir.
I was going to say, I know somebody that I talked to most recently. They used to be afraid of flying.
Yes, yeah, this is a big
taking
one.
the planes.
It's very common.
So I asked them how they got over that phobia, and they mentioned that they took some therapy sessions where whoever they were working with, they gave them this, I guess, tool, you would call it, where whenever he would start to feel anxious of flying or even thinking about it, to either replace that with a positive feeling. So
that's it right there.
Yeah, his thing was laughter. So he would just just start smiling and kind of chuckle.
Yeah. You know, William James, who's the father of American psychology back in the 1800s, had this concept that, and it's used in, for example, the 12-step programs, the idea of fake it till you make it, which is common in the 12-step programs, is you can follow that route all the way back to William James. And the idea, you just mentioned it, is that if I'm unhappy, as bizarre as it sounds, just to physically smile will evoke the emotion, oftentimes of happiness or even of humor. It doesn't always do that.
Right.
And it's always bugged me because it seems so simplistic.
Right.
But that for whatever reason, the way that we're wired, the muscles that are involved in smiling, I think because they get associated with happiness, is that if you're feeling glum and can even physically bring yourself to smile, which sometimes if you've ever been depressed, it's really hard to do, can make a difference. There's no guarantees with that, but it's like if laughing, you know, if you imagine when you're really stressed out, it's really hard to laugh. It's hard to find humor in anything. We tend to get more rigid. So if there's some way to practice the opposite, that gets at Joseph Wolpe's idea of reciprocal inhibition. So how does that tie into this topic? Well, if I can learn how to practice, like let's say you compliment me, and let's say that my first thing would be to bat it away, because after all, I'm a low-life scum and I don't really deserve compliments. What would it be like to open myself to that? Well, it's impossible to open myself to a compliment and really feel it and continue to hold on to the previous feeling. In fact, that move is referred to in psychology as cognitive dissonance, which moves us to our next psychology lesson of the day. In fall of 1977, I took my first psychology class as a psychology major. It's memorable to me because it was a big event in my life. And I can still remember the first chapter I read the first week of my being a psychology major in fall of 1977. And it was about this. It was about cognitive dissonance, and we read the theory of Leon Festinger. I have a pretty picture of Leon Festinger, and Austin's going to bring it up right now. There he is. There's Dr. Festinger. I was thinking about him this week, and I remember reading about this theory very early on. It's since I didn't know any psychology, it tripled my knowledge of psychology just to read this, and it was kind of unforgettable. And his basic idea is this. It's very related to Joseph Wolpe's idea of reciprocal inhibition, is that there are times where you have attitudes or beliefs that are at odds with one another, hence dissonant, and that none of us can sustain that dissonance for long. It's too uncomfortable. And so we'll find some way to resolve the cognitive dissonance by coming up with some kind of solution. Good or bad, just some way to resolve the dissonance. So let's tie cognitive dissonance into what we were just talking about. Let's say, have you ever been hard on yourself with somebody? And in front of somebody say, oh, I can't believe that I'm not good at anything, or maybe self-critical would be. Can you think of an example of that?
I used to be that way.
Yeah. What's an example of being self-critical?
Trying to think what. I used to have a very favorite thing I used to. Whatever anybody would throw at me, I'd replace it with, for example, hey, you're pretty good at X, Y, Z, and I'd be like, oh well, it's you're better at it.
That's just some example like that. I can remember, my version of it would be to say something to you and say, oh, I don't really know, but, and it would be like, sometimes I did know.
Yeah.
But I would just preface it by, I don't know. Somebody's got a comment and I can't read it. No, I'll get to it in just a second. We'll get to it in just a second. So whatever it is that we use to disqualify ourselves, well, imagine if we were open, if somebody came to you and me and you're going, no, you're better at it, and I'm saying I don't know, what would it be like to find a self-affirming or self-compassionate perspective, which is, sometimes I do know something, or sometimes I am better at things than other people, is that what that does is that it creates a dissonance inside, because if Odie doesn't feel like he's better at something, or Bob doesn't feel like he knows something, and I begin to have feedback from outside or even from inside that, I do know what I'm talking about, or you do know what you're doing, it's hard to hold those two, and it actually will move the counter or the ticker towards feeling better about yourself. So what Fessinger is saying is that we can resolve cognitive dissonance by practicing what Joseph Volpe was saying, opposite behaviors, and over time the dissonance begins to arise. For example, I liked how you said it, is I used to do this in the past. I used to do this in the past, but the fact is I've taught psychology for 40 years, and I know a lot. I don't know everything, but I don't say I don't know very often when it comes to psychology. And it wouldn't make sense for me to say that. But it took, I can tell you this, I can still remember my first year in graduate school, taking a midterm exam in psychological assessment, and I studied my butt off on this exam. And we were in an amphitheater, the whole class. There were 25 students in the class. The teacher came in after the midterm exam the next week and said, handed back the exam and said, we'd like to read one entire exam. And it was mine. He read my entire exam to the class, all the questions, everything. I get the chills right now. And the whole class stood up and gave applause. And I wanted to crawl through the floor. That tells you where I was in terms of self-esteem. Wow. I remember going to my supervision group the next day, and I didn't have any clue other than to say I was so embarrassed by that. I wouldn't be embarrassed today. I wouldn't be embarrassed. I don't know that I would gloat over it, but I wouldn't be embarrassed. It's hard to believe that it was not that long ago that I would have been, I felt like literally crawling to the hole. Everybody's up clapping as they read my exam, and I'll tell you what it was. My self-concept was so low, I couldn't reconcile. It was too dissonant. And you have the whole class clapping, the teacher picking my exam. I couldn't reconcile that with my self-esteem at that point. And now it would be the opposite for me. I think it would be, in fact, it's hard to imagine being that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so I guess the next question would be, I don't know if it's further along, but
I don't know.
How did you get through that, I guess, eventually get over doing that of wanting to crawl into
That's a great question. That's a great question. I want to answer that. Let me see what the question is here that Austin has, and I'll get to that in just a second. Maybe after or before. Let's see. This individual, who's Angela. Hi, Angela. I know it's you. I think there is neurological evidence now that genuine smiling, the musculature in the face during a smile, communicates to the nervous system that you're safe and things are okay. I think you're exactly right, Angela. I think that's exactly right. If you look at Stephen Porges's work around the polyvagal, his polyvagal theory, I bet it's rooted right in that. And I think you're more familiar with that than I am, is that in Williams James' day, we didn't have the neurology. He was just looking at it behaviorally. And nowadays, we have the ability to scan brains. And so I believe that's the case. That makes complete sense to me, that somehow or another our smiling is linked to our, would it be our ventral vagal response or our dorsal vagal response? I'll have to ask you to contribute that, Angela, if you know. Okay, thank you. That's a good point. Back to your question, which is a really practical question, and it's really tied in today's presentation, is that we're going to do a meditation in just a couple minutes here that's going to be focused on gratitudes. We're going to I'm going to take us through a series of kind of headings or topics for which we can just focus privately on where we're grateful. And you may not hit on all cylinders with this in terms of feeling grateful across the board, but certainly some of these will resonate for you. I just came from a group where we did this, and then we debriefed after it, and we're going to do that today. But so we'll do an exercise once today. If today's the only exercise that we did that, I don't think that changes that much. I think it can feel good temporarily. But your question is, Bob, how did you change from the person that wanted to crawl into a hole when the class acknowledged your exam? How'd you get from that to today, where today I can hardly understand how that's possible? I only kind of know intellectually because I don't feel connected to that person. And that's, in my life, it's just half my life ago. So the way I think about it, I've got a strange image. It's strange only because I know it's inaccurate, and we might have used it here before, but have we talked about the Golden Gate Bridge before?
I don't think so.
I've always had this image. I'm just going to make this up. This is going to drive engineers in the audience flipping crazy. But I've always had this sense. Both my brothers went to UC Berkeley in the late 60s, early 70s, and I used to go up and visit them a lot, and I was quite taken by the Golden Gate Bridge. We went there often as a boy, and I wondered, how did they get that bridge out there? And so I had this image, and I know it's not probably accurate, but I had this image that they somehow created these big cylinders and began pouring concrete in them, because you have to form a foundation for those huge spires of the Golden Gate Bridge. And again, forgive me, all you engineers, but the image I've had that stayed with me is that you keep pouring that and you keep pouring it, and eventually it begins to fill up to where you begin to develop a foundation for, in this case, a bridge. And then eventually, if you keep doing that long enough, it actually comes up through the water, and it actually surfaces. And if you look at the Golden Gate Bridge, or any bridge for that matter, they've got these concrete foundations. Now, how they got there, I don't really know. But my answer to your question is related to this image, since I was a boy, of how the Golden Gate Bridge got there, is I think you just keep laying down buckets of concrete or strands of fiber, whatever the image is. And I think each one of those is a contribution towards something that eventually will surface above the water. That's where the image comes in for me, is that at some point you begin to work on. So there was that experience. And if that experience was isolated, it would go nowhere. In fact, it did go nowhere that day. It was like the opposite. But I began to accrue experiences across graduate school and then into my professional career as a teacher, as a therapist, and then in my relationships and so on, I began to accrue experiences that didn't square with the way I grew up. I grew up doubting myself. And without vilifying family and others, I just didn't have much mirroring of my gifts or talents, or really kind of who I was growing up. For lots of different reasons that didn't happen. And if you don't get mirrored from the outside, if you literally don't have a mirror, you don't know what you look like. So if somebody says, "Hey Bob, you're really smart," if there's been no mirror for that, it's just kind of embarrassing. It's like, what are you talking about? But as I began to lay down these experiences over time, there began to be a foundation. And I'm not saying that it was straightforward or that it was fast, but over time, I don't doubt certain things, And it's funny because it's not inflated. There's a bunch of stuff I'm not good at, but I know a lot about psychology.
Right, yeah.
I know, I just showed you my ignorance. I know very little about engineering, particularly Golden Gate Bridge engineering. So I just acknowledge that to you right now, okay? But if you can begin to develop these focal areas of competence, psychology says that our self-esteem is based on self-efficacy. So whatever it is that I'm gifted with and can develop that gift and then share with the world, that will be the basis of my self-esteem. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so if, for example, I haven't seen you, but I take your word for it that you're very talented at drumming. And so
rumor has it.
So I guess that's a way to put it. Of when you first started, obviously you didn't know much. And
no, I was a spaz.
Yeah, and eventually you got to that point though where you were just like, you know what, I'm pretty good at this.
I can tell you how that went for me. My first 3 years of drumming, my first 4 years of drumming, I was just kind of middling, and I was spent those first 4 years just practicing what they call rudiments on drums. And I really think I was middling. I can still remember what it was like in 6th grade and 7th grade. Started in 4th grade when I was 9. And kind of plugging along, and really there's the pylons, the The concrete is below the water. And in 8th grade, my 8th grade band teacher, Mr. Carlson, said, I think you should try out for all-county orchestra. And I didn't. That would be like getting applauded in graduate school. I went, whatever. And so I went out for it, and I was selected. Out of all the drummers in that area, I was selected for all-county orchestra. And I honestly didn't go in. It didn't go in, but it was like a strand. It was a strand. Yeah. And then I started high school, and as a freshman, my band teacher said, I think you should try out for all-county orchestra. This is in high school. And I did, and I got in. And the same in my sophomore year. And it began to accrue over time, and I began to have more and more experiences. And it takes a lot of those experiences for some of us. Depends on what your mirroring is. But there was no interest in my family about my drumming. So any mirroring I was getting was from the outside world. And as that began to accrue over time, I began to develop more and more with that. So I think what we're talking about is like a realistic basis for self-esteem. We're not talking about inflation or making stuff up. You know, the basis of self-esteem isn't my saying you're such a nice guy, unless you are. Right. You know, it has to match reality. So whatever it is like that. And so you know, we're talking about skills like knowing psychology or drumming. You and Austin both are extremely gifted in terms of all of the technical things that you do here. And I hope that you see the results of that, absolutely. But there's so many things that both of you are that isn't summarized by what you do. You know, I know how to drum, and if I've drummed for 50-odd years, I should be pretty good at it. I guess there's no guarantee. I've known some drummers that have drummed for that long that are not that good at it, but I am. Okay. There's a lot of stuff I'm not good at, but a lot of stuff that I'm good at that has more to do with the interpersonal, for example. I think all three of us are caring individuals, and that may or may not have been rewarded where you grew up. I've gotten rewarded for that over time, and that becomes a part of my self-esteem. I feel really grateful to care about people. Is there another comment or question? There sure is. This person says, I've had a lot of difficulty with this practice of emphasizing the positive, like fake it till you make it, because it seems like it ignores the pain of being in the negative. Is there a risk of bypassing or suppressing? I'm smiling because I know this is Angela. Is there a risk of bypassing or suppressing your pain by putting on the positive, like being in denial? Amen to that. I have the same, Angela. I have the same challenge with the thing. Fake it till you make it. And I know some of this is my temperament, some of this is my background in psychology. So many people come in to see me over the years for counseling, therapy, now coaching, and so on, that don't have the muscles to be able to sit with grief or sorrow or pain or guilt or sadness, grief, etc. And I think sometimes the downside to accentuating the positive, like the song in Jungle Book, is sometimes that you can do that by bypassing the negative. That's what you're talking about. So I'm all for balance, and I hope that comes through in our conversations here. You'll notice how we've talked about over time. I think that shame is a problematic emotion. It's a universal one, but it's problematic if we get stuck in it. But I have never advised that we get rid of guilt. You know, guilt is my barometer for how I'm doing ethically with you and how I'm being true to myself. Shame tends to paralyze me and shut me down. So that distinction matters a lot, but it's not about avoiding ownership for making mistakes or letting others down or letting ourselves down. And so that's a good balance, and I appreciate that very much, Angela. I think I think I would very much join you in carrying kind of the yin and the yang here, the light and the dark together. I like very much a phrase from the Far East. It's been attributed to Lao Tzu in the Tao Te Ching, where he says, I'm trying to remember exactly how this goes. There's a couple different passages that come to mind, but one of them, he says, the heavy is the root of the light. The fact that the dark is the root of the light. And so you can't have the light if you don't have a relationship to the heavy or to the dark. Makes me think of one of the attributions. I'm looking at you in terms of your Christian faith. One of the terms that's been used to describe Jesus is a man well acquainted with sorrow, a man of sorrow, a man well acquainted with grief, is that Jesus is depicted throughout the New Testament as caring a lot about the outcasts. He didn't go for the high and mighty.
Right.
He went for those that were on the periphery, those that had suffered, those with leprosy, those that were ill, those that were prejudiced against, and so on like that. And so you get these models across world religions, and you get extraordinary human beings, on the planet. Mother Teresa comes to mind. Gandhi comes to mind. Nelson Mandela comes to mind. Martin Luther King comes to mind. These people that have left such a massive imprint from their lives and their ability to give to those that are rejected. The Bible talks about Jesus as being the capstone that the builders rejected. He was the rejected one.
Right.
He wasn't the high and mighty popular one. And so here's to holding for a balance between light and dark, for sure. Let's do an exercise. I'll tell you the intention of the exercise, and then we'll just dive in. It's a 5-minute exercise, and we'll just unpack it. And then we'll send us on our way to Thanksgiving dinners in Arizona and Florida.
Sounds good.
We talked about cognitive dissonance. What would it be like for me to practice? And this gets to your question.
Yeah.
Really appreciate it. It's a very thoughtful question. It gets to the fact that what would it be like for me to practice gratitude in place of shame? What would it be for me to practice self-compassion instead of shame? What would it be like for me to lay down these strands that we're talking about, or back to the Golden Gate, to keep pouring cement in there until finally there's something to support the huge bridge that is our lives? And we're going to do a practice right now. I'm an experiment. One day there'll be a journal article, and the experiment will be 10 years of gratitude practice on one person. It's on me. So for much of the last half a dozen years, most mornings, many more mornings than not, this is what I practice. And I've introduced this before, and you can go back and review previous podcasts, but never right before Thanksgiving. And it's simple, and I'll just tell you real quickly what it's based on. It's based on psychology. I use Maslow's hierarchy, which is it's a pyramid of ascending needs or motivations. And the idea is that we start by looking at our physiological foundation. We have to be breathing and have food to move to the next level, which gets at security, both physical security, like a roof over our heads, and emotional security, like people we trust in our lives. And then we move beyond that to intimate connection with others in terms of belonging. And then we move, with that foundation in place, we move to beginning to build out our lives. Is that with the support of others, we talked about it earlier with mirroring, I can begin to exercise my gifts. And that those gifts are in support of why I'm on this planet, which is to actualize my unique signature, Odie's, Austin's. And so what we'll do is we'll go through that hierarchy from foundations all the way to the very last one. So that's the logic of it. And if you want to read more about this, you can just look up Wikipedia, Maslow's hierarchy. Abraham Maslow was a psychologist. He was one of the presidents of the American Psychological Association, which is kind of like a validation of your career. And you can look him up. It's MASLOW, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And we're going to use that as the template for gratitude today. And the good thing about it is it gives you kind of a template, but you can fill it in with your specifics. And I'm not going to ask Odie to share his, or I don't know that I'll share mine, but I will be interested to know what your experience is overall with this. So we'll talk about that. So we'll do a 5-minute exercise. We'll unpack that exercise and send a few parting messages around what we're calling gratitude practice, and then we'll wrap up for the day. So if you'll join me, what we'll do is just a real brief mindfulness of the breath, just a few breaths, and then we'll move into the practice itself. And I'll let you fill in the blanks, and I hope to leave enough space for you to do that. And then we'll come back out. Okay, so I'm going to close my eyes. You're welcome to do that, or lower your eyes just to reduce distraction. Taking a deep breath. And release that when you feel comfortable. Another deep breath in when you're ready. And let that out, just relaxing. Let's do one more deep breath all the way down into your stomach. Feel your diaphragm rise. And then feel it fall as you let the breath out. Okay. Since our focus here is on addiction and recovery, if you yourself are in recovery from any form of addiction, whether to substance or other behaviors, let's just take a moment to express gratitude if you've been sober from that addiction today. Express gratitude for sobriety. Next would be to express gratitude insofar as it applies. By the way, find those that apply to you and join them, and others that don't, you can just let them go by. But this would be gratitude for your overall physical health. All of us have complaints. Some of us have pretty major ones. But if you find any basis for celebrating or acknowledging with gratitude your physical health, let's do that for a moment. I should have said this earlier, but if you come from a faith tradition, this is a time where you can thank God, or however you understand a power greater than yourself. In the 12-step traditions, it's used, that language is used, of a higher power. It doesn't require it to express gratitude. For some people, they express gratitude to the universe. And, next, if you have the opportunity to go for a walk today or take any form of physical exercise, to express gratitude, knowing that there are plenty of people that are housebound and can't get out of bed. So to express gratitude for any form of exercise that you can give to your body and to yourself. While I'm thinking of it, oftentimes I'll do this for like 24 hours around my gratitude practice. I typically practice this in the morning. So if you're going to exercise later, you can be thankful for that. If you're going to exercise tomorrow, be thankful for that. If you exercised yesterday, you have a chance to be appreciative of that. So exercise. Next would be if you're able to eat food that is nutritious and healthful, to express gratitude for that. That's obviously not a given on this planet at all. If you've eaten poorly in the past and are able to eat healthfully today, there's another way to be grateful too. For many of the people I work with who are in recovery, early recovery from addiction, sleep is really dicey. And so if you're able to have had a good night's rest last night or hope to tonight, to express gratitude for that. And it's very relative. For some people, it's just adding an hour of sleep when they've really been shortchanged. And so just if it feels like it applies to you, gratitude for sleep. It's so important to our health. And while we're at it, gratitude for anything that you can do as part of your day that's non-addictive, that contributes to calming your body and your mind. Psychology calls it self-regulation. Anything that you do, yoga, meditation, prayer, exercise, listening to music, talking with friends, ways that you have of nurturing yourself, gratitude for that. Next, gratitude for a roof over your head. I'm hoping that applies to all of us. Hopefully we all have food on the table, able to eat, have some security in terms of being able to predict that. I work with many people who in addiction have lost that privilege, have lost a roof over their head and sleep on the streets or sleep in the woods. And so just gratitude for the simple staples of material security. Literally gratitude for the clothes on our back, gratitude for any material possessions that we particularly enjoy that are meaningful to us. I literally will express oftentimes gratitude for my drums. I'm just so grateful for my drums. Related to material security is relationship or emotional security. So here, gratitude for anybody in our life that we can rely on, that we can count on to be with us through thick and thin. For so many of us in recovery from addiction, we've had relationship loss. People have lost trust in us because, frankly, we've oftentimes betrayed that trust. And so if you have anybody in your life at all, even one individual that you feel like you can really count on, it can be a parent or a partner, a sibling, a friend, someone who takes special effort to care for you. Gratitude for that. An extension of that, gratitude for anybody that we feel close to. This can be a friend, a family member, a loved one, someone that we can share who we are with and who does that with us, where there's a sense of mutual connection and care and compassion. Gratitude for that form of emotional and spiritual intimacy with anybody in our lives. And if you have even one person, count yourself blessed. Next, gratitude for any gifts you've been given in terms of your own personal skills and attributes and talents. For some, it's embedded in the work they do. For some, it's in the schooling that they're seeking, education. For some, it's the day-to-day contributions they make to a household, or to family life, or to society in some form. There's all kinds of opportunities to review our lives and look at the gifts that we have. And even if those are gifts that are in potential, that they're still being worked out, to express gratitude for the opportunity to be able to live out these gifts of grace. And that relates to the final one for today, and that is gratitude for being able to live a life that has some purpose, some sense of direction, some meaning, opportunity to live our values with integrity, to whatever extent that's true for you, to appreciate that, to have a life that's worth living. For some, it's contributing to others' welfare. For some, it's to healing our bodies and psyches. It's like being able to live out why we're really here on this planet. Gratitude for that. Maslow called it self-actualization, to be able to actually be who we were meant to be. So to the extent that that's true, gratitude for that. Okay, when you're ready, you can open your eyes and we'll come back. Only have a couple of questions, and that is to invite you, Odie, and I'll share about this briefly, is what did you find most meaningful? What meant the most to you? What did you like the most? What was most helpful?
I think the beginning part of it, where you were talking about being grateful for food.
Mm-hmm.
I've sometimes I think about that when well, usually my wife and I, before we eat, we'll bless our food.
Yes.
And so, like, one of the prayers that I tend to sometimes do, not all the times, but when I do, I think about it and just think about how true it is of just being grateful to being able to eat, just because it's not a given all over the world. So I like that. And then I was thinking of how when I was younger, my family wasn't well off. So, you know, just there was times where we would struggle and pretty much would need help with the food. So just thinking about that, being grateful that by the grace of God, you know, not a day goes by that not hungry unless it's by choice.
That's tremendous gratitude in the simple things, isn't it? Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
I feel similarly. I have a similar background. There wasn't always enough food, and sometimes it was pretty simple. I don't know that I knew it fully at the time.
Right, yeah, you don't.
You know,
you don't think
how many nights do you have beans and cornbread, you know? And we had that a lot. I tended to like that, which was fortunate, but it was pretty slim pickings at various times. Yeah. Did you find anything difficult to find gratitude in, or find anything that was challenging about the exercise?
I think sometimes in the beginning, when I do practice gratitude, sometimes, not all the times, it's usually difficult to think of things, but I notice that it gets easier once, even if you just say something, if I say something that I may not necessarily completely mean, it'll start it'll trickle into other things, like, well, I don't think I'm completely grateful for that, but I'm grateful for this. Oh yeah, and this. Oh, and this. I'm really grateful for this.
I like that. Yeah, you know, you're kind of aiming towards where I was going with this in just a minute or two, which is that I really am all for ritualizing this practice, and I do myself. I mean, what we just did is close to what I do every morning. I do it internally. I don't speak it outside, but I do it every morning, and it becomes kind of the skeleton or the framework for my gratitude. And I won't rush through it. I'll just land on each one and wait for something to come up. It helps me a lot to have a template or a blueprint for my meditations. And I do it and have done it so often. I guess you could say I could do it rote. I could do it in a rote way. I don't wish to do it in a rote way, but I also like not having to wait and dream up stuff. It's like going through this format actually evokes associations. One of the things that I do that's very easy, I did it this morning, and you guys were in it, is every morning when I express gratitude. Remember how I talked about friendships, or emotional connection? I go through my entire day looking at every person that I know that I'm going to interact with. Sometimes because it's groups, I can't go through every person, but sometimes people will leap out maybe. But every Wednesday morning before I come in and meet with you guys, I think of you and I express gratitude. And so what it does at the end of just that section of my meditation is I'm so happy to be coming into my day. It converts my day into, oh God, I have to go to work, to, my gosh, I get to see Austin and Odie today. And there's a whole list of people, and it's like that every day. And so you can see how having that ritual on the one hand could be kind of empty or rote, but it's not at all for me. It informs the whole day. I've never done that in my life, like looked forward, and I literally go through. It's not hard for me because I know what my days are. I just start from where I am right now at 6 a.m. I go through the whole day. It takes me a couple of minutes, and I'm chomping at the bit. I want to come see you guys. I miss you. So anyway, what I want to suggest is that everybody can adapt this to however you want to do it, and I don't think you have to follow this format. I found it really helpful for me because it covers most of the major bases for me in terms of body, mind, emotion, spirit, all of that. And let me just say a word as we close about this. There's a psychologist up at UC Davis, University of California at Davis, Robert Emmons, and Robert has made his entire career work looking at gratitude, the psychology of gratitude. And this won't be a big surprise, but he's looked at the relationship, for example, of gratitude to stress, ties right into what we were saying earlier today about reciprocal inhibition and also about cognitive dissonance, which I'm sure that we all got that down now, right? The fact is that for me to express gratitude, we talked about it in relationship to shame or low self-esteem. he looks at it in terms of it's one of the most effective things that we can do to reduce stress. If you think about it, look at the teeter-totter of the brain is that when my stress hormones are jacked up, literally jacking me up with cortisol and adrenaline, is that to actually do what we're doing is relaxing. My sense of it for me, like if I think of you guys, and I do, coming to be with you guys later in the day, I don't know for sure, but if you were to test me, I think there's a little dopamine release that goes with that because I care about both of you, and dopamine regulates stress. And so what Robert Emmons is looking at is, what would it be like to practice this regularly as like a self-regulation practice? There's all kinds of mindfulness, meditation, prayer, yoga, and so on. He says, why not add this? And I've got lots of his research articles and one of his books that really make the case very compellingly that one of the most practical things I can do is practice gratitude throughout my day in whatever way I can. So I think it's apropos of the season in terms of Thanksgiving. Yeah, I have a plan to do this tomorrow. My wife doesn't know this yet, but we have family coming, and I'm going to spring this on them tomorrow. I'm not sure. I may come across as just a dork, but I just thought, what would it be like to go into Thanksgiving and just spend 5 minutes together as family, and just again, just honoring people's privacy, just open up a space, just exactly what we did today. And so I'm going to try that, and I'll come back next week and I'll report on that. But it's very much in the spirit of this, and I'll tell you why. I tend to be shy about my spiritual practices, but I don't think it does. I think it can do a disservice if this is something that's valuable. Why would I want to put it under a bushel basket?
Right.
So it's ironic because I share this with clients that I work with, but I don't share it with my own family. So tomorrow I'm taking the leap, you guys.
Okay.
So the goal in the spirit of Robert Emmons' work is that if we can do something that's a gift to ourselves by really focusing like we did today on gratitude, is that it covers a multitude of sins, so to speak. It can help reduce shame in the way that we talked about Dr. Joseph Wolpe or Dr. Leon Fessinger's work. It can reduce shame. Definitely, according to Dr. Emmons' research, reduces stress. And for any of you that have seen any of our podcasts, the number one trigger for relapse to addiction is stress. And so literally anything I can do to reduce stress, whether it's interpersonal stress, we talk about in our bodies, we talk about exercise, we talk about creativity, everything that we suggest here is meant to be a practical application of what I can do to reduce stress, because that's literally cash in the bank in terms of ensuring sustained sobriety from our addictions. And so I'm all for that. Stress is our kind of like public enemy number one. And it's interesting that gratitude, tomorrow's holiday, is a whole holiday. Ideally, it's funny because I remember reading this years ago. There was a prominent meditation teacher who said, if you think you're so enlightened, go home and spend Thanksgiving with your family. Because for many of us, that stresses us out. Yeah. So I'm going to suggest this is the Bob Weathers prescription and Odie Martinez and Austin Armstrong prescription, is see if there's a way to practice, or really practice what the holiday's about tomorrow, to see if there's a way to bring Thanksgiving, whether you do it privately or if you risk doing what I'm doing, which is sharing this exercise tomorrow with unsuspecting family members. See what you can do to reduce stress tomorrow and really celebrate the holiday. So my homework assignment for all of us is what would it be like to establish, even for a week? I have a guarantee. It's close to a guarantee. I don't know about the money back part. Is if we were to practice gratitude once a day for 5 minutes for 7 days, my suspicion is that you would realize the benefit and you'd not want to stop that. I think you have to practice it a few times. It's like doing any exercise. But I think even a week of practice, of daily practice, I'm talking about 5 minutes, you'll realize the benefit's strong enough to be loath to let it go. I can miss a day here or there. I always self-write to it because it's so dadgum beneficial to me. So there's so many things to be thankful for, and let's start tomorrow. And I challenge you to practice this not only tomorrow but for a week, and see where it takes you. So we're talking about celebrating Thanksgiving. As each week we talk about hope. I think there's really hope in internalizing what we're talking about in terms of gratitude practice. And as we've so often talked about, so many things we introduce here, they can be valuable. This can be a meaningful exercise today, but it's like any other exercise we do in our life. I won't learn how to be a good drummer by drumming once. I need to drum over and over again. I won't develop abs by doing one set of sit-ups. I've got to do that regularly. And so on it goes. Any skill that we develop. And so the same case with gratitude here is that what would it be for me to internalize this and really practice this in whatever form? I suspect that it would be very useful. So have a thankful Thanksgiving, a thankful week of Thanksgiving. We'll be back next week. We'll be talking about, I actually suggested this topic last week, but Thanksgiving came in. We'll be talking about waking up, and we'll be tying it into mindfulness next week. So waking up with mindfulness will be our topic for next Wednesday. I hope that you'll come join us. Any final comments or questions that you have for Odie or for myself, feel free to send them to Austin through Ask an Addiction Specialist. He'll forward those to me. You can also respond to our YouTube videos, and those will get to me. You can also go to my website, drbobweathers.com, and there's a contact me place there. And not infrequently, somebody will reach out with a comment or question there, and I'll be happy. It comes to my email. So any experiences of success or even frustration with this exercise, write me, and we'll fine-tune it together. I wish most of all that you all have a very full and rich Thanksgiving. And in that spirit, Odie and I in Austin, thank you for joining us. Thanks for joining us, and we hope to see you again soon. Take care. Bye-bye for now.